But now we're going to switch gears to NCAA basketball. And, over the years, folks have talked about how NCAA athletics doesn't have the popularity in New England as it does probably across the rest of the country. It's obviously big down south. New York, the college basketball scene was always kind of pretty big. Midwest football and basketball are big. And then, of course, on the West Coast. Back in the day, BC basketball was pretty good. They had, Dana Barros, they had Billy Curley, Scooney Penn when he was there, before he transferred to Ohio State. They had some nice basketball teams in the Al Skinner years with not Jim Craig, but Craig James. No, not Craig James. Who am I thinking of? I'll get back to it. But they had a nice team that went to the Elite Eight. They've had some great years, and lately it hasn't been good. And one of the big news items that came out this week was the head basketball coach of Boston College, Jim Christian, has been fired. I know as a coach, Brandon, you hate to see anybody get fired, but he hasn't been good. It hasn't been a good run for Jim Christian. This was his 7th season. Hasn't been good in the ACC at all. I think that's the biggest thing, but his record is well under 500, and this year they're 3-13. So a move had to be made by BC.
Yeah, like you said, I think first off, talking about, like you said, how college sports aren't as big in the Northeast and they're bigger down south. I think you see that a lot where there's not pro teams that are close.
Right.
And, up in the Northeast, we're just stacked with pro teams on top of each other. So we kind of gravitate to that first. But, I think NCAA still does get its love, especially NCAA football. But I would like to see NCAA basketball make a resurgence furthermore than just March Madness. But yeah, I think, I don't like seeing any coach get fired, like you said. However, I think with 7 seasons with a losing record, I believe he was like 68 and like 122 or something like that. You'll have to double check that for me. But I know he had a losing record in 7 seasons. So I honestly think it's time. I think it's time for them to move on. I think they arguably could have moved on last season to look for a different direction for this program. And here's the thing, and it's the same thing for UMass football. So Walt Bell, I know I follow him on Twitter. He's the head football coach at UMass. But if you cannot even recruit your own state well, or you can't recruit New England well, then you're just not going to have a chance of obviously recruiting players from around the country to come to Massachusetts, whether it be Boston College or UMass. So I think that's the 2 things that coaches have had really trouble with at both of those schools recently. And I think that's what Jim Christian had trouble with, that he couldn't even recruit his own state well, couldn't recruit New England well, couldn't bring in high-quality New England players. So he's definitely not going to get a player from, Florida or California or Texas to want to come here. So I think that's really what it comes down to, is poor recruiting over this year's. The same thing will happen to Walt Bell in a couple of years, 4 or 5 years. If he can't recruit well at UMass and get UMass's football team on track, I think you'll see him get dispatched as well. And it happens. It happens. It just happens in college sports. It happens in pro sports. You get so many years to kind of get your program together and get it on track. And if you can't do it, then they're looking for somebody else because of how much money's involved.
No question. And, it's been a struggle for BC to really gain momentum, in their league since they joined the ACC. It's a tough league, especially in basketball. Over the last couple decades at least, the ACC has been the toughest conference in college basketball. But just to get the numbers officially, 78 and 132 overall for Jim Christian, 26 and 94 in the ACC. So the struggles in the ACC, and you see this in football too, where they just had a tough time in this new conference. Your schedule is obviously more stacked. You got Duke twice, you got UNC twice, Wake Forest, NC State, across the board. Football, you got Clemson every year, Virginia Tech. So, it's certainly tough. It's always going to be a tough schedule every year for the BC football and basketball. But now that you're in the ACC, you can kind of use that in recruiting. Now, Christian did have Kai Bowman and Jerome Robinson a couple of years ago, which was a nice backcourt tandem for BC in the 2017-18 season. They won 19 games. They made it to the NIT, but that's not – you want BC making it to the NCAA tournament. I think that's bottom line. Like, you want to see them there in March when everybody else wants to watch them too. So, and I think in basketball, the difference between basketball and football when it comes to recruiting too is you really just need a couple of guys. If you can get a couple of players that are some top recruits, not the top 10. You're probably not going to get a top 10 recruit if you're BC. But if you can get a couple of really good top 30 recruits, top 50 recruits, and then, like you mentioned, you recruit well in the New England, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania area for BC, I think you'll be in great shape. So, like you mentioned, recruiting has been one of Christian's toughest, hurdles that he hasn't been able to leap over. And now there's a lot of talk about who's going to be the next head coach for Boston College. There's a few names out there. I know John Beeline, who used to be the head coach at Michigan, is somebody that folks have talked about. And then a few coaches from some other schools, like, say, Bonaventure and that. But I think one thing we got to look out for, if we're talking about the replacement for Jim Christian, is a couple of local guys. One is Tommy Amaker. He's the head coach at Harvard. He's done a great job there, 241 and 135 at Harvard University. They've been one of the top teams in the Ivy League and have made the NCAA tournament over the past few years as well. He's done a great job there. Tommy was a college player, famous college player himself, was an assistant coach at Michigan. You have an African-American coach that can go and talk to these African-American kids that are obviously smart. They can come to BC, they can go to Harvard. He's spoken to the recruits that BC should be going after, because he's going after similar guys to go to Harvard. So he's a guy to look out for. Another guy to look out for is at my alma mater at Northeastern is Billy Cohen. Billy Cohen's done a great job at Northeastern. They've made the NCAA tournament a couple of times. If you've been to the facilities at Northeastern, Matthews Arena is cool and all, but it's not Conti Forum, and he still gets great recruits to go there. They do very well in the CAA, and he was an assistant under Al Skinner. And there was always this talk about, Al Skinner's a great coach. He's built a great program at BC, but Billy Cohen and a couple of the other assistant coaches did a great job recruiting there. So he's a guy you've got to look out for as well. And then one more guy, I think, is Joe Jones at Boston University. He spent 1 year as an assistant at Boston College. It was just after the Al Skinner years, before he took the BU job. And he's been recruiting in this area as well, getting kids that are going to a school that's thought of highly academically, and he's recruiting in the Patriot League. So I think some of those guys are the guys that you got to look at as well, along with some of the national guys for this BC job. But it will be very interesting to see what Boston College does in the head basketball department.
Yeah, no, those first two that you brought up, John Beeline, I think that would be a great choice. He's obviously had a great program with Michigan. They made the NCAA tournament several years, so I think I would be happy with that choice, to be honest. I'd also be happy with Tommy Amaker, like you said, a guy that can definitely come in and recruit New England and get it done. So I think if you're going to name your next head coach as one of those two guys, I think your program would be going in the right direction, and I think that's what BC needs to be doing right now, is obviously getting their program in the right direction. Those two would be great names going forward to do that. And like I said, BC, we're talking about pretty much the premier university in New England, especially as far as facilities go. So they have one of the nicest campuses, one of the best facilities. They have an endless bankroll of money. So it's like they need to really pull it off and get themselves back in the driver's seat here, especially in the recruiting game. And that goes for basketball and football. But I think, like you said, if you hire those two coaches, I think one of those two coaches, I think, would be a great replacement to get this program back on track. Honestly, I think Al Skinner had the glory years of BC basketball most recently. I love those years of Al Skinner. Hey, bring Al Skinner back. Let's get that chant going. Bring Al Skinner back, because I think he would be a great choice too, to be honest. So,
you know what? There's another rumor, and this could be an interesting hire too for head coach, Jared Dudley. He's still in the NBA. Wow. He's still in the NBA, but if he retires at the end of the season, he's with the Lakers, so he's won a title, and he's one of those guys that's like the glue guy in every team that he plays on. But he was a great player at BC back in the Al Skinner glory years, and he's another guy that could be a head coach candidate for BC.
That'd be great. Like if he's willing to come into coaching and right off the bat, obviously coming from an NBA team and winning some titles, I mean, he's going to have a lot of experience, was definitely one of those glory players from those glory years of Al Skinner. So I wouldn't mind that. I think that would create some great hype. You would definitely start a great recruiting train by bringing in a former player that, as long as he knows what he's doing, with the X's and O's, which I don't doubt that Jared Dudley could do a good job, to be honest. Honestly, though, if I'm the president of BC, though, I'm going with one of those two first guys, though, with John Beeline or Tommy Amaker. I just think that's a higher play for us going forward to get our programs in the right direction.